Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hello everyone, it is wonderful to have you back with us for another governance update here on VLGA Connect, with our thanks to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, the wonderful sponsors of this program. They keep coming back week after week, as do many of you, and it boggles my mind as to why. Steve Cooper, hello.
Hello, Chris Eddy.
Do you know why? Why are these people still here?
I don't know. I am quite worried for them, but I thank them anyway.
All right, we've got a lot to talk about as usual. Never a dull moment in local government, but I think the headline is another successful IDAHOBIT day has come and gone. And let's just have a look at these numbers, Steve. 68, I understand, of 79 councils acknowledged IDAHOBIT Day this year by flying the rainbow flag. Let's not just focus on the 11 that haven't for a moment and focus on the 68, because I believe there's at least a couple of additional ones this year.
I thought it was terrific, Chris, a great celebration, certainly on my social media feed, of the events that councils were conducting for the day and the various ways that they marked IDAHOBIT Day, which was really powerful.
When you look through the LinkedIn feeds, the Twitter feeds, etc., a couple of themes emerging. Obviously, some really strong support from councils and councillors, but I did notice a few used the opportunity to jointly acknowledge the occasion with other community groups or organisations. Did you notice that?
Certainly, Chris, and it really, I think, signifies a shift that's been occurring in the way councils operate, that local governments no longer do things for community groups. It's partnering and taking steps with community groups.
Now, there's some highly publicised ones, one in particular that has come late to the party this year, but arrived at the right decision ultimately. I know of one or two metro councils that hadn't acknowledged it until this year, so kudos to those. I don't suppose anyone's got the list of the 11 that haven't, not that we're wanting to name and shame, but it would be good to keep an eye on that number over the next couple of years.
No, and the thing I would hope, Chris, and we've touched on this before, is that as councils move to, not only celebrate IDAHOBIT Day, but other kind of social issues, that it's done in an orderly, well-planned way that is heavy on policy and light on politics, because that ensures, really sustainable change where people don't get hurt.
All right, so that's IDAHOBIT Day come and gone for another year. What has arrived this week? We're not sure if this is, probably by the time you see this will be on the Local Government Victoria website, and it's the Insights Report from the Culture Project, Steve.
Chris, we haven't held back. We've been, quite strident at times in our criticism of Minister Sean Lean and his timing of announcements, but credit where it's due that the Minister actually orchestrated release of this report to the peak bodies, where Friday morning, it was Thursday, that was circulated.
Thank you, Minister. That's greatly appreciated. We'd hate to have gone through the whole weekend reading this report and not mentioning it on the governance update. That would have just been an embarrassment too far, wouldn't it, Steve?
Oh, I may well have lost sleep, Chris. So, as I said, kudos to the Minister. But maybe we should talk about what's in the report.
Look, I think we should, and I'm really looking forward to getting some feedback from people and hearing what they think about this. It's pretty far-reaching. I want to get to some of the opportunities in a moment that have been listed there for further exploration, Steve. But headline, 149 responses, which I thought could have been higher, particularly from councils. Only 11% of the respondents were councils, 27% were current councillors, and a few CEOs have submitted to this individually as well, 5%. Members of the public, 21%. So just a couple of standout stats for me there.
Yeah, I think so, Chris. I was a bit surprised by how few, considering, and we've said often here that, culture is the biggest game in town. One of the things I would have liked to see a bit more of, and maybe it'll emerge during the next phase of the program, is really an emphasis on some of the good work that's done. The report does make some pretty disturbing commentary, quite rightly, on what you might euphemistically call misbehaviour. And
the other interesting thing is the relevance, I guess, of the discussion paper to what people thought were the issues. 96% of the submissions confirmed the themes. 4% actually contradicted one or more of the themes in the paper, but 14% raised new themes that weren't referenced in the discussion paper, which I think is a healthy stat too.
Oh, absolutely. And you'd like to think that any sort of discussion paper is reasonably on the money, but promotes that sort of discussion. So that's good. And I know the VLGA, we've talked in our submission quite extensively about the fact that there is a political kind of overlay. And I know there are themes that are not surprising that have emerged around, councils being board of directors like. And sort of tucked away on page 11, there is an acknowledgement that the politics and the representation of communities does impact on the way that councils operate.
Yeah, so let's look at a little bit of the detail. Now, we're probably going to unpack this, I think, in more detail on a VLGA Connect, because I know Catherine's really keen to keep the focus on the culture review through that program. But leadership experience and capability, the councillor journey, and early intervention and effective dispute resolution are the three sort of themes of what the sector's saying. But the devil really here is in the detail when they unpack those submissions, the suggestions that have been made. And I went straight for opportunities for further exploration, Steve. Anything particular jump out at you before I give you mine?
I think I know where you're going to go, so I'll go somewhere else first. I was pleasantly surprised that some emphasis was given to the opportunities for support or additional support to mayors, because that role of mayor is important, and that's really worth thinking of.
We see that all the time, don't we? Mayors that are, some are very well equipped, some are new to the role. It's that leadership role and providing the guidance and advice to other councillors on appropriate behaviours and navigating some of those tricky situations where the submissions here and the paper seems to agree more support is needed. I agree.
Absolutely. Now, where are you going to go though, Chris? Surprise me.
Well, you won't be surprised. I hone straight in on, maybe it's my background, the things that impact on the CEO and the councillor relationship in particular. And there's quite a bit in here. The ones I've highlighted, though, are exploring legislative additions to protect the CEO or provide CEOs with the ability to discipline councillors displaying poor behaviour and misconduct. I think that's a really interesting one, a really challenging one too, when you think about the quoted, inverted commas, employment relationship.
Well, particularly when one of the case studies that was actually quoted in the report talked to how difficult it is for CEOs, or for a particular case where a CEO was required to initiate an investigative process against one of the councillors, who effectively employs the CEO. So that dynamic is a really one that's full of tension.
And therefore it also flags the exploration of having the CEO recruitment and performance assessment, as well as governance and culture reviews potentially, being conducted by a third party, an external independent party.
That was that was a big call. That is really worth some consideration by councils as to what would that mean, and what would the change of dynamic be, councillors, if in fact you were presented with a CEO and needed to work with that person where you don't, it really changes the power dynamic.
Sure would. It would really delineate areas of responsibility as well, much more than it is now, wouldn't it? The grey areas potentially would become less grey.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Steve, what do you think about the idea of exploring term limits for councillors?
That was the most surprising thing I read in the report, I think, Chris, and it got me to wondering what are the dynamics at play there. I have heard people talk about, an 8-year maximum in the past, but it would be worthwhile exploring. Is there something to say that councillors having extended terms beyond that are part of the issue? And I don't think it's necessarily pointing to the individual councillor, but is that case where there is not sufficient change in the councillor group part of the problem?
Well, we put them on generally independent members on audit committees, for example, for, I would suggest, similar reasons. So why not look at it from, and CEOs are on contract terms, and, with some exceptions, they generally don't hang around beyond the 2-3 term mark. So why not explore that for councillors too?
Oh, well, that's true. And I mean, if you went back to the CEO employment arrangement, Chris, one of the issues with that independent appointment is that surely an independent who was responsible for, say, for example, recruitment of a CEO or assessing the performance of the CEO would look to understanding completely the relationship between the CEO and the council and whether there is a public interest in continuity or change.
Yeah. We've probably got a few councillors yelling at their iPad screen or their podcast app at the moment. I expect that one will be quite contentious, and there'll be quite a lot of discussion about it, which is what the process is all about. Formal mentoring for councillors, increased clarity on councillors' leadership responsibilities, goes a bit hand in hand with that support for the mayor and their leadership role, Steve, and mandatory training for mayors. Yeah,
for sure, Chris. I think it's worth noting too, though, we're talking about culture. There is no one silver bullet. Yeah. It's about the whole thing and how those individual ingredients make an impact.
Couple more that I've highlighted: increase councillor allowances to increase the candidature pool and improve council demographics. That's a bit of the you pay peanuts, you get monkeys sort of argument, isn't it?
Oh, look, Chris, we at the VLGA made a submission to that effect. I think, and it's a pity that there is so much currency given to keeping the allowance at a low level, as if there is some public benefit in scrimping on what you pay your strategic leaders.
Apropos of a conversation we had last week about a discussion going on in South Australia, include more family-friendly meeting times and flexible working arrangements.
Well, it was terrific to see a whole section in the report devoted to the topic of diversity and inclusion and the impact on culture, Chris. And sort of back to IDAHOBIT Day, we know it's about, the issue of intersectionality is important, where if you create a more inclusive environment, whether it's, for any particular group, you increase the pool more generally. Social
media gets its own section.
What a surprise.
No, not at all.
No.
You can imagine it took up a reasonable part of some of or many of the submissions, given its prevalence.
Oh, look, it must have, Chris. And we've aired social media here before. I thought in that sense, look, one of the issues is there's no great surprises in some of the appalling behaviour that we see on social media. There is certainly an amount that councils can do by having strong, well-founded social media policies, but a lot of it goes to culture and good judgment and a culture of respect that we might come back to later.
Perhaps two more things, unless you've got others you want to raise. I thought this was interesting. Extend or establish training for the general public on the functions and expectations of the LG sector and roles and responsibilities of the various actors. I just wondered how that would work and who would participate.
I'm not sure exactly how it would work, Chris, but I know the VLGA submission certainly touched on that, and I know we weren't the only ones. Look, one of the issues is where you get this mismatch between what the community expect of their local councillor and the roles and responsibilities as laid out in the Act that the councillor in making their oath of office signs up for. If there's a disconnect, that is always going to be difficult. So, basically doing whatever we can more broadly in civics, I think it's a good thing.
And the other sort of more general catch-all is around managing conduct or misconduct, looking at the time frames, trying to, I guess, streamline is my word, how that process works, but also looking at expanding the role of municipal monitors in a number of ways, using them as mentors, using them in ad hoc situations, even a suggestion of roving municipal monitors using a mystery shopper type process.
Wouldn't be a bad thing. And there's been quite a lot of talk, Chris, about how, historically, in the last 15 years, the appointment of a monitor has been seen as an automatic precursor to a council suspension or dismissal. But what we've seen more recently is the appointment of a monitor as a circuit breaker or, an intervention to to assist. And so would be really good to actually formalise that.
Absolutely. All right. So the Insights report, we've really just skimmed the surface. There's a lot in it. I think it's a really readable and interesting report, but we're local government tragics. We know there's a few more out there. So it's not on as of recording the LGV website, but we understand it will be imminently, to use our favourite word.
And we'll put the link in the show notes, Chris.
We will indeed. There's a culture project section on the local government Victoria website, and I'm sure we'll be coming back and talking a lot more about next steps. So what's your understanding, Steve, of where this takes us next?
The report, Chris, talks about the fact that the next steps need to be implemented in conjunction with the sector so that they can be sustainable. So in a sense, we're talking about whatever the next steps are, needs to have buy-in from the sector, because, it can't be a top-down approach from head office.
And the Minister, I know, is keen for the sector to own the solutions here and be part of whatever flows from it. A couple of other states are going through similar processes, not exactly the same, but I imagine they'll be watching pretty closely to see what comes out of the Victorian process, and hopefully we're leading the way in terms of some meaningful change.
I think so. I think the fact that we're talking about culture is important. And it can be a difficult conversation, but as you've said before, when we were quoting, I think, a Tasmanian mayor, we really need to look into the mirror, not just the window.
Absolutely. All right. Some other stories making news. There's quite a bit, so let's see if we can sort of touch on these and do each of them a little bit of justice. Darebin Council's in the news again, this time because they've launched a process to identify opportunities to transfer council land to Indigenous people. Herald Sun report early in the week quoting some of the councillors there as saying they want to set a national trend in this space.
Chris, and I think it's really important to look at this in the context of treaty, of what's occurring across the state at the moment with the Uruk Truth Commission, and the fact that this process of treaty will automatically and of necessity require, meaningful dialogue between councils and the traditional owners, and particularly the elders. So I think props to Darebin Council for getting on the front foot with this. I think this is not a topic that can be just ignored in the hope that, someone else will do it, that the councils who engage in this process meaningfully will have a richer conversation with the traditional owners and have better outcomes for communities, both First Nations communities and wider communities more generally, and us as a nation.
Yeah, nicely said. And we'll come to a related topic in just a second. While we're on Darebin, I just want to note that Darebin had a special meeting on the 18th, what was that, Wednesday evening, to confirm the appointment of an interim CEO. And it's an internal appointment. I'm really pleased to see Rachel Olivia confirmed in that role for the time being. Well done, Rachel.
And Rachel's the general manager responsible for all things planning, amongst other things. So has navigated some difficult issues with the council already, and great to see that she enjoys their confidence.
So on to Moreland. We're not travelling very far here. The renaming process that we've been keeping an eye on has taken a big step forward last weekend. In fact, they had a special event and a council meeting to formally receive a short list of 3 names that have been put through a process by the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation. I love all of these names, Steve. I'm not making comment on whether the naming is. I think it's a good process. It appears to be fully thought out and will engage the community. But I know there's some contention about it. But I do love the names that have been shortlisted.
Wadambuk, meaning renew, Marybeck, meaning rocky country, and Durang, meaning leaf of tree, Chris. So, and I think the important thing is that these are names that have the support and endorsement of the elders, of the traditional owners. So I think the bit of contention that's really, I suppose, interesting here is there's a bit of discussion going on post the council meeting as to whether the council should have first had a discussion or a referenda, if you like, as to whether the renaming should take place.
Right.
And the majority of councillors have made the call to move straight to asking the traditional owners for the names. I'm a bit old-fashioned, Chris. I reckon that councils get to make decisions at times and get to stand on their record at the time of election. And it's probably worth saying that a debate about whether the renaming should occur may well have been pretty divisive and hurtful.
Yeah, and I'm a bit old-fashioned in the same way that that's what you elect your local representatives to do, to make those decisions, notwithstanding deliberative democracy, participative consultation processes are going to be required at certain times. And that's what we've got here on the name. Have you got a preference out of those three if you were in Moreland and voting?
Chris, we haven't talked about cricket, but I quite like Merry Beck because all the best turf wickets are Merry Creek soil. But no, I don't actually. I don't have a strong name. I think it's just terrific that the names have come from the elders. Whatever the Moreland community vote for, great.
Yeah, I like Gerang. It's got a ring to it that I like.
Rhymes with Kerrang and Terang, Chris.
Oh, it does too. Yes. Okay. Apropos of nothing?
No, nothing at all.
Okay. There's an online survey being launched and hard copy surveys for that Moreland community. The council's going to consider the feedback in July, understand and determine a preferred name. And then that's got to go through the process, submit to the minister, etc., and go through the geographic naming process. Yeah. So there's a bit of water to comb under the bridge yet.
And now there's more going on at Moreland though, Chris.
There is, Steve. Not great news, this one. The depot workers there have voted to go on strike. They're taking a 3-day strike from, I think it's next Wednesday. This is reportedly after their request for a $50 per week pay rise was rejected. It's the second strike by depot workers in a month. Last month, there was a period of time, I think for a day, where rubbish collected, and this time or wasn't collected, rather. It what's the word? When it accumulates, there we go. And, 3 days obviously is going to have a stronger effect again.
Look, Chris, and I see this quite detailed news report about that. I thought one of the things that was interesting, that the issue was raised that if the council's spending $500,000 on the renaming, surely they can pay their staff a bit more. And you always get at any level of government that argument about where the money is spent. I also thought, Chris, that in some ways it's really interesting the timing of when this EB happened to come up at a point where wages keeping pace with inflation is a live issue, and we know that there's whatever is decided at Moreland will have a knock-on effect for every other local government.
So, Steve, as most people see or hear this, the election's probably over, although it might be a while before we have a result. But the campaign promises have certainly kept flooding in recent days. I was interested in an analysis the ABC did on pool projects in particular. We see a lot of pool projects get lots of money thrown at them by both of the major parties. In fact, the vast majority of those from recent campaigns are yet to be delivered, and there's concerns about the level of debt that councils will be forced to take on to deliver those projects.
Chris, I wonder if next week, without the shackles of a federal election coming up, we might talk about a few of these issues in more detail. But we have spoken previously about the fact that often when federal money in particular goes to a council capital works project, it still leaves the council with the bulk of the funding responsibility.
And notwithstanding, most of the time, these are projects that are on council's books in their capital works plans and their asset management plans, etc. So that they want to deliver them. So there's a real betwixt and between here.
Well, sometimes, Chris, but sometimes they are projects that are not on the capital works plan, and the council is put in that difficult situation of how to then reshuffle and give a priority because they've got money coming from elsewhere. And so I think you're about to segue into the advocacy that's being particularly led by the Australian Local Government Association.
Yes, I was, because Linda Scott, the president, has put out a statement this week summarising what's been achieved in the advocacy campaign. She says billions of dollars have been secured as a result of that advocacy, including $500 million from the Coalition, $750 from Labor to extend the local roads and community infrastructure program. The other interesting one is the financial assistance grants. She said commitments have been made from both parties to continue to increase those untied grants. And there's $200 million a year promised by Labor to invest in disaster mitigation and resilience. So there's some of the things that have been strong themes of the broader sector advocacy. The fags is an interesting one.
Look, it is indeed, Chris. And I know actually by the time most listeners get this program, that the agenda for the Mildura City Council meeting next week will be available. And Councillor Jason Modica has lodged a notice of motion, particularly around that question of the financial assistance grants, which, and it actually surprised me, but since the mid-1990s to now have declined from 1% of federal taxation revenue to 0.55% of tax revenue. And so Jason's calling for broader advocacy, not only from Mildura, but from councils right across the country, to support a return to that 1%.
I think we need to keep the foot to the pedal on this one, and with the ALGA National General Assembly coming up in June, I'm sure it'll be a hot topic. But I often quote that figure, Steve, that local government collects 3% of tax revenue in this country and delivers upwards of 20% of services that communities rely on. The mix is not fair.
No, and we've got 80% of roads, Chris. I think the other thing, this notion of efficiency in local government really needs to be unpacked, because certainly in Victoria, and the reasons for rate capping have been around, I guess, the rate shocks that some residents receive. But we're now seeing that the impact of rate capping isn't sort of greater efficiencies. What we're seeing is councils just getting out of services, but still having to provide an administration. That's becoming problematic. And Jason did a rather excellent bit of analysis just on some of the financials and made the point quite reasonably that federal government fossil fuel subsidies are over $10 billion. Federal government financial assistance grants to local government are $2.1 billion.
Wow.
Where are our priorities?
That's extraordinary. I
thought so too.
Yeah. Okay. Good bit of research there. Okay, we should dig a bit deeper into that. Perhaps we can even talk to Jason about it at some point. So let's just keep an eye on that one. A couple of things, Steve, that caught my eye from a couple of Victorian councils this week that I gave you a little bit of homework to do. I want to talk about Indigo Shire. Great little council. I've done a bit of work with them over the past few years. I did tune into their meeting during the week because the motion from the mayor to potentially open up their briefing sessions to the public was due to be considered again, having been deferred from the last meeting. It's been deferred again, but the process by which they got there, I thought, was really interesting from a governance point of view. Raised a whole load of questions about the application of governance rules for me.
Did it? Look, it's worth a watch, Chris. And I think it's at about the 1 hour mark of the meeting earlier this week, which must have been about the 17th. And what happened was that the mayor sought to vacate the chair so that he could move his notice of motion. And the conversation around open council briefings is one for another day.
Yes.
But the council was unable to get a nomination from the floor to act as chair.
And part of that problem, Steve, forgive me for jumping in, was that the deputy mayor was zooming into the meeting and under the governance rules couldn't assume the chair.
That's it. And we like following the governance rules, Chris. That's usually a good idea. But they should be read like the laws of cricket, in the spirit of the game, rather than black letter. But then what happened was that the mayor basically resumed the chair, and when a couple of councillors sought to resurrect the issue, the mayor said that the motion had lapsed, and eventually we moved on. The things that were interesting for me there from a nerdy governance rule point of view, Chris, was that the mayor quite rightly sought to vacate the chair because their governance rules about motions say that they can't be moved from the chair. But the motion didn't lapse because a lapsed
never got moved.
It was never on the table.
Yeah,
and the governance laws are quite specific.
Yeah.
It lapses when you can't get a seconder. The other thing is that their governance rules say that where a councillor who's lodged the notice of motion is absent or otherwise able to put the motion, it can be moved from the floor. So it would have been possible to give another councillor the opportunity to move the motion. And I'm not being critical of the mayor because none of the councillors said those magic words, point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Look, governance can be a bit of a dark art in the heat of the moment of council meetings, but I made those same observations. The motion wasn't on the table, therefore it couldn't possibly have lapsed. And you're right, no one actually called points of order on those things. And then there was debate about how do we get this deferred to another meeting.
Yeah, and I think that was my point about the rules of cricket, Chris, because ultimately it's not in the public interest to have overly pedantic interpretations of the governance rules, but they are there to assist and facilitate the running of the meeting and should be used that way.
All right, that meeting's there on the YouTube channel if you want to have a look. But the upshot of it is we've got to wait another month now to see whether they determine to open those briefing sessions to the public, which is really why I was tuning in, because I'm really interested to see where they land on that.
Likewise, we'll come back to that, Chris, I think.
We will. Another interesting one that involved lapsing this week, Steve, was Greater Shepparton. Again, I tuned in because I wanted to see how they dealt with this policy that had been prepared to deal with councillors and mayors who are standing for state or federal election. Of course, as many of you would know, Greater Shepparton has a councillor on leave at the moment standing for state election, Rob Priestley. There's a whole another story about that campaign that we could go into, but probably don't have time. No, and the mayor has indicated, Kim O'Keefe, that she will be standing down to run for, or at least taking leave of absence, I assume, to run for state parliament. Sorry, I think I said Rob was running for state. He's running for federal, Kim running for state later this year. So a policy's been developed to provide extra guidance. It was listed on the agenda for Wednesday night's meeting, came to the appointed time in the agenda, and it lapsed because no one was prepared to move it. Deathly silence.
Yeah. Well-functioning council, Greater Shepparton, coherent council, really good administration. I guess my only comment on that would be, Chris, as a general rule, it's a good idea for councils to be able to close discussion on a particular issue so people know where they're at. If you couldn't get a motion to approve the policy or vary the policy, then maybe it would be good if someone moved a motion to take no further action for the time being on the policy.
Yes.
And then we all know.
Absolutely. It just leaves a vacuum, doesn't it? So I know the press was there and they spoke to the mayor after the meeting. She's quoted as saying that councillors considered it was overkill because there are already rules governing candidacy, and she's reiterated that she will be stepping down at the appropriate time, doing what is fair for the council and the community at the appropriate time is what she said.
Yeah. And as I said, Chris, I think this goes to culture. It's on its own, it's small beer. But if you had a council that had a habit of not doing that, you'd kind of wonder what was going on.
All right, we'll leave that one there. Two other things I wanted to just note from interstate, Steve. The Western Australian Minister for Local Government, John Carey, is quite active on LinkedIn. I do enjoy his posts. And he made one this week about concerns over meetings that councils are holding at very late notice, and that's about the transparency issue and the community understanding what's being dealt with there. But also, I gather he sees an increased prevalence of items being dealt with in confidence, and he's looking to deal with both of those issues in the review of the sector that he's currently running.
I picked up on that one too, Chris, and thought it's a terrific reminder, because how easy is it? You'll recall the Ombudsman did a report, I think 2015, about and found that some councils were dealing with matters confidentially because they were embarrassing, not because they would be confidential. It would also be easy to allow briefings to slide into being decision-making forums. So sort of constant reminders around how we do business and maintaining transparency, I think is terrific, and good on the Minister in Western Australia for posting that.
Big tick there. And perhaps the last one that caught my eye is out of Cumberland City Council in New South Wales, where they've seen the need to develop a campaign about curbing these instances of attacks, whether it be physical or verbal assaults on their staff. So you're talking parking officers, rangers, etc., I assume customer service people. 65 incidents in the span of just over 2 years, with a whole lot more they think that haven't been reported, and they're basically saying enough's enough.
Oh, look, and it spans a number of levels, Chris. It's not right that people go to work and receive that sort of treatment. It's damaging to individuals, it's damaging to us as a society, and it would be costing the council some money in terms of avoidable work cover issues. I think there's just an issue around people being angry. And I don't know if this is a long bow to draw, but I was really taken a few weeks ago on Anzac Day at an NRL game where someone shouted out before the end of the minute's silence, and the gentleman behind thought it was a good idea to start punching him. Oh, now, really? What have we come to as a society where we're so intolerant? People aren't always perfect. You mightn't always agree, but there's a real conversation around culture, around what's the kind of level engagement that we accept, and yes. how should we encourage better behaviour?
Do you think that's exacerbated by the pandemic? Have we lost our social skills because of some of those conditions that have been imposed upon us?
There has been a bit of my right to get angry, Chris, hasn't there? Yeah.
Steve, I know I said that was the last item, but perhaps just one last one, because you brought this to my attention, something happening in Bath and North East Somerset, I think it is, Council in England.
Oh, Chris, I don't like it when you raise issues without notice. But yeah, that one was one where the council realised that a booking had been received from an organisation, I think effectively an anti-vax organisation, whose goals and objectives were contrary to the sort of national health and, World Health Organisation guidelines. And the council said, no, you can't have your booking.
Yes.
And I thought good on them. If councils have got policies around public health and an organisation wants to do something different, I think public health trumps free speech. So
I do too.
There's controversial for you.
I think the issue here was they probably made the booking and no one realised what it was, and it was getting close to conference time when the council realised, or someone raised it on social media, I think, and they jumped in and said, oh, we can't have that, so sorry, you're not coming. Good on them.
Absolutely.
We'll leave that there. Thank you, Steve. Have another great week. And are you going to be watching the election coverage on Saturday night?
I will be glued on Saturday night, Chris.
As will
waiting for Anthony Green to make his call.
Absolutely. Yep, that's where we'll be, the ABC for sure. All right, thanks, Steve. And thanks to Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, our sponsors, for another edition of the Governance Update from VLGA Connect. Bye for now.